Want to know how to buy a home in Arizona? The purchase agreement is a legal contract with timelines and deadlines, and failure to follow the contract as outlined could result in your inability to negotiate stuff like repairs, or worst case scenario, it can result in the loss of your earnest money should you decide to cancel. So understanding the contract, terms, timelines, and contingencies is crucial. In this video, I'm going to take you from contract to close so you can be an informed buyer. So if you're going at this home buying thing alone, grab a pen and a paper because I'm going to go over a lot of information that you're going to want to hear. But if you have a trusted real estate advisor that's going to guide you through every step of this process, tell you what you need to know, when you need to know it, this could be a good video for you too. It'll just give you a rundown of all of the things that we do in the background to protect your best interest and your earnest money. So you get the good news. Your contract has been accepted. Take a moment to celebrate, but don't take too long because once you've gotten an accepted offer, the contractual clock starts ticking. Now, the first and most important thing you're going to want to do is take your earnest money. It can be a personal check or a cashier's check, along with a copy of the purchase agreement to the title company. Now, you would have already done your due diligence on title companies and listed in the purchase contract that you submitted to the seller the name, the address of the title company that's going to be handling your escrow, as well as the particular escrow officer that you're going to be working with. So make sure you get those documents to the right location. And once you've done that, you have officially and successfully opened escrow. Now, the time between contract to close is your time to work through any contingencies noted in the contract. What's a contingency? Contingency is a clause outlined in the purchase contract that allows you, the buyer, opportunity to gain more information about the property while maintaining the ability to back out of the contract without losing your earnest deposit. Now, in Arizona, there are several contingencies that could apply, but keep in mind that if the contingency is not specifically listed in the purchase contract, well then, you can't claim it later on. So it has to be listed in the purchase agreement. So the contingencies that we often see in Arizona are the inspection contingency. There is the financial contingency, the appraisal contingency, the title contingency, the HOA contingency, and sale of a home contingency. So there's 6 contingencies that could be in the purchase contract. Now, when it comes to a contingency, there are several parts to a contingency. Every contingency, at minimum, must have the terms of the contingency. It must have a timeline or a date of which the contingency or fulfillment of the contingency must be met. And it will also specify the rights and obligations of each party if the contingency is not met. Okay, maybe I should have called this a contingency video, but it is very relevant because contingencies are what happen when you're between contract to close. I know it's a lot, so let me break it down for you. Okay, so here's a breakdown. You have your inspection contingency, your title contingency, your HOA contingency, your financing contingency, and your appraisal contingency. And then there's the sale of a home contingency. This is if you need to sell your home in order to buy the other home. Now, each of these has different key points in the purchase contract and timelines that you're going to want to make sure to follow. So make sure you know your timeframes. I'm going to talk about these contingencies in the order that we typically see them come up in the purchase contract. But keep in mind that if you are going at this alone and you are not using a realtor, you're using somebody else's forms, or maybe you created your own purchase contract, the timelines are going to be dictated by what is in the contract. So keep that in mind. But the first contingency that we usually address or deal with in the purchase agreement is the inspection contingency. The inspection contingency typically happens in the first 10 days of going under contract. And during this time, you're going to want to make sure to do your due diligence on the home, which includes scheduling a general inspection. Typically, I like to do it within the first 3 days of going under contract because that inspection could identify possibly other inspections needing to be ordered. If there are additional trades and inspections that you want to call in, you want to make sure that you have enough time to schedule them. There's other things that you want to consider as well. Sewer scopes. Sewer scopes are inspections that oftentimes people overlook. A sewer scope is probably a good idea on any home that is maybe 10 years or older. You want to make sure that there's no obstructions, there's no bellies in the sewer lines, because that can be a costly repair. This is also your time to do your inspection on natural things, fissures, plumes. Then you also have termite inspections. Termites are a thing in Arizona. Make sure you know everything that you can about that home. Aside from the inspections, I always recommend for people to not only make sure that you're good with the home that you're going to be living in or purchasing, but you're also good with the community that you're going to be buying into. How long does it take you to get to and from work? What is the feel of the grocery store that you're going to be doing your grocery shopping at? How do you like it? Do you like the look and feel of that community? Drive around the community at night. How does it feel? Are the neighbors all loud? And, maybe you like that, but maybe you don't. So this is really your time. The inspection period is your time to do all of your due diligence on the home. Now, typically, while this is going on, okay, you are going to be in your financial contingency as well. And the contract states that you need to do your very best and make the best possible effort in making sure that your lender has everything that they need so that you can get final approval and close on that house. So while you're doing this, do not neglect this. You want to make sure that you're giving your lender everything that they need in the timeline that they've asked for it, and make sure that you're going to be good to go with the financing. While you're in here and also working on here, there is a financial check-in that is required on day 10 of the purchase contract. And that financial check-in comes in the way of a loan status update. Your lender sometimes needs to be reminded to send that to the seller, and your signature is required on the document. So make sure you do not fail to provide this to the seller, because if you don't provide it to them by day 10, then you could possibly be in breach of contract. Okay, so while you're doing this, make sure not to neglect this. And then this often happens or starts while you are in your inspection period. So while you're in your inspection period, you will probably receive a copy of the title commitment. Do not disregard this email. It's important for you, the buyer, to review the title commitment. In summary, the title commitment outlines everything regarding the transfer of ownership, and it's made up of two schedules, Schedule A and Schedule B. A lists the legal description of the property, the parties associated with the transaction, the amount of the sale of the property, and how it will be vested, whether a community property or joint tenancy. Now, Schedule A of the title commitment also outlines the lender's name. Make sure that information is correct and let your escrow officer know if you see something that needs to be corrected right away. Now, Schedule B outlines things that need to be in place or take place or requirements met in order for the property to have a clear transfer of ownership with no encumbrances on the property. It will list things like payment of property taxes, liens that need to be paid, sometimes judgments that need to be taken care of. Now, keep an eye out for things that could delay the transfer of ownership, such as bankruptcy or lis pendens. If you see terms like that, it could mean that there are some legal issues pending to be worked out, and it could affect the transfer of ownership of the home, or at the very least, it could delay closing. This transfer of ownership will include a seller's title insurance policy purchased by the seller for the amount of the sale. The insurance policy protects the new homeowner's interest against past claims to the property. Schedule B, Part 2 of the title commitment lists any exceptions to this insurance coverage for the property, as well as deed restrictions that will transfer with the deed. These are items like HOAs and CC&Rs, water rights, easements, stuff like that. This section usually includes hyperlinks that will take you to a PDF copy of the HOA CC&Rs, tax records, county recorder's website. Make sure to click on these links and continue learning about the property, and make sure that you're okay with the findings. This contingency gives you 5 days from the time the title commitment is sent to review and give notice of your disapproval. Now, if you were still within your due diligence period, you can voice your disapproval along with your inspection findings. However, if you do not receive your title commitment until after you've gone through the inspection period, you have 5 days from the date of receipt to give notice of your disapproval. If you're working with a trusted real estate advisor, they will notify you of when that email comes in. They'll take a look at it. They will bring to your attention anything that's notable. But if you're not working with a real estate advisor, if you're doing this alone, you're going to want to make sure that you're checking your spam and your junk folders every single day, because you don't want this email to go into one of those folders and you never know it was sent out. Now, while this inspection contingency is happening and you're getting your documents to the lender, and the loan status update and the title commitment is something that you are verifying, you will likely also be in your HOA contingency. Now, your HOA documents are usually included on the title commitment document, so make sure that you click on that link and you research the HOA. You want to make sure that there are no rules or regulations on the property that would go against your intended use or enjoyment of that house that you're going to be purchasing. For example, if you run a home-based business, you want to make sure that your HOA documents do not say that you cannot run a business out of your property. You also want to make sure, if you purchased a property with an RV gate because you had plans to store your RV there, you want to make sure that the HOA rules and regulations do not say that that is prohibited. So again, once you receive the HOA, you go over all the documents. If everything is good, you're fine. But if there's something that you dispute from your findings, you have 5 days from the date of receipt of your HOA to exercise that contingency. Ooh, I'm slacking on my board. So title contingency is 5 days from receipt of the title commitment. HOA contingency is 5 days from receipt of HOA. You will usually receive these documents on day 5 through day 7, and that's the same for this one. Now the appraisal contingency, this one usually doesn't happen, well, it's 5 days, but it doesn't happen until you receive the notice of low appraisal, and that could be, I don't know, it can be at any time. But one thing to note about the appraisal, you don't want to order the appraisal before you've gone through negotiations with the inspection contingency, because once you order the appraisal and you've paid for it, what if you can't figure out negotiations over here and you decide to cancel the contract over here? Well, you've already paid for your appraisal. I don't know if you're going to get the money back. Talk to your lender. And then you have your financing contingency. This one is ongoing, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay, so you've researched, you've inspected, you've done all of your due diligence on your new purchase. If within this due diligence or inspection period, you discovered anything that you disapprove of, the buyer provides a notice to the seller of how they want to proceed. There are 3 options. Accept the property as is, give the seller the option to remedy or repair items that you disapprove of, or give a credit in lieu of repairs, or 3, the buyer can elect to cancel the contract. Now, there's 2 notes that I want to make about this regarding the disapproval process. You have until 11:59 p.m. on the last day of your due diligence period to provide notice to the seller. This is very important because if you're 60 seconds late, negotiations for remedying anything that you disapprove of are off the table. And if your disapproval was going to result in a cancellation, you lose the right to your earnest money. Now, option 2, which includes the option of taking a seller credit in lieu of repairs, is an important one. If you're not working with an experienced realtor or you decide to do this alone, you must be aware that most loans have limits when it comes to seller contributions, as well as rules on how those contributions can be used. If you are accepting cash in lieu of repairs, you want to make sure that your lender will allow that credit to offset the costs of your loan. It would be a sad day if you agreed on a credit and then you find out a week before closing that you can't use the credit. It just basically goes away. Once you've submitted your list of items of disapproval to the seller has 5 days to respond. During the 5 days, they are likely calculating the cost of the repairs, maybe consulting with their realtor or getting estimates, and you can expect to receive one of 3 responses. 1, the seller agrees to correct the items disapproved of. 2, the seller is unwilling or unable to correct the items disapproved of. Or 3, the seller can list which items they will address or correct. The buyer then has until 11:59 on the 3rd day after they receive that notice to respond with 1, either they're accepting the seller's response and therefore accepting the property, or they could cancel. I know that was a lot, but I know you're taking good notes too. So yay, you're moving forward. While all these inspections and negotiations were happening per contract, you've looked into homeowner's insurance, you've done everything that the lender needs to get your loan approved secured, and the next step is to order the appraisal through your lender. And that takes us to the appraisal contingency. Now, the appraisal is required by the lender to ensure that the home's value is in line with the purchase contract. If you have an experienced real estate advisor, they will likely have pool cons to ensure that the home is priced in line with recent sales in the area. This is really important because a lender will never lend on a home that is valued under the contract price. So if we get a low appraisal, or if you get a low appraisal, one of 3 things can happen. The seller lowers the price, the buyer raises the amount of cash that they're going to bring in to make up the difference between the purchase price and the appraisal price, or this way. Or 3, they meet in the middle. Or 4, worst case scenario, the deal dies, in which case you, the buyer, have put money into a home inspection and an appraisal with nothing to show for it in the end because you paid for the appraisal. But you will get your earnest money back as long as you submit your notice of cancellation within 5 days of receiving the low appraisal. Now, the loan contingency, right here. If you're getting a loan for your new home purchase, you will have a loan contingency. The way the contingency works is that if the buyer has made good faith effort and diligent effort to obtain loan approval and is unable to do so, the buyer can cancel the contract no later than 3 days prior to closing without losing their earnest money. The cancellation comes with a notice from the lender noting you were not able to get approval. But of course, you are approved. You wouldn't have started the process if you weren't a solid buyer and you're working with one of our trusted loan officers, so you know what you're getting yourself into ahead of time and we know you're approved. Now, it's time for the walkthrough. Within 3 days before closing on your new home, you're going to want to schedule your final walkthrough of the home. The purpose of this is to ensure any agreed upon repairs have been completed and that the property is in the same condition as when you first walked through the home, minus the seller's personal items, of course. Within 3 days of closing, you, the buyer, should receive final approval from your lender, and once the loan docs are received by the title company, it's time to schedule your signing on your new home. Now, the contract states that the loan docs final approval must be given within 3 days of closing. So make sure the lender has everything that they need. Make sure you're able to get that approval from the lender, because if you don't have that, you could be in breach of contract and the sellers can cure you. But that is for a different video. Okay, financing contingency 3 days before closing. Insert the review of the settlement statement here. How did I almost forget you? So after you've gotten your final loan approval, the lender and the title company are going to balance things out so that the title company can give you a dollar amount that you need to bring to closing. And this dollar amount has to be presented in the form of official funds or certified funds. So it needs to be a wire or it needs to be a cashier's check. So the settlement statement is something that is typically sent to the realtor to review. And what we would do is make sure that all credits that were negotiated as a part of the transaction between buyer and seller, that those credits are listed in the settlement statement. We also verify item listed for impounds, and then just make sure that all of the other fees look good. If you are representing yourself, then you're going to want to make sure that you get a copy of the settlement statement, that you review it to make sure that everything makes sense, and that you notify the title company if there's any errors in there. It's really crucial that if there were negotiations during the inspection contingency period, that if the seller is giving you a credit in lieu of repairs, that an addendum was signed, that the lender got that addendum, and that the title company also got a copy of that addendum, because that is how the title company knows that they need to make any kind of adjustments or put in any kind of credits between buyer and seller. But don't wait until you get to this point to make sure that your lender has a copy of an addendum that involves credits, because they may have to send that file back to the underwriter to get final approval, because now we're talking about a change to monies that are involved, and that can delay closing, and that could lead to a breach of contract, and that could lead to damages, arbitration, and mediation. Oh my. Final contingency, home sale contingency. Now this contingency is when you are buying a home contingent on the sale of the home that you currently own. Now there are two types of home sale contingencies. The first type is where you have a buyer for your home and you are telling the seller of the home that you're going to buy that you are buying it contingent on closing on this home. Okay, so when that happens, all of the timelines for these things stay the same, unless you elect otherwise, of course. But let's say you don't have your home listed on the market, or you don't have a for sale sign up in front of your home to sell it yet. You want the seller of the home that you're wanting to buy to accept your contract contingent on you finding a buyer for your home and closing on that home. When that happens, there are usually two options that you have when it comes to timelines for your inspection periods. You can say my inspection period will begin once I make an offer on your home, Mr. Seller, and you accept it, or the inspection period begins when you source a buyer for your home. So keep that in mind. Always keep in mind that if it's not in writing, it doesn't matter. It doesn't count. It's not a contingency. Closing day. On closing day, there are things that the title company has to do and the lender have to do to make sure that the seller gets their money, to make sure the deed is recorded and transferred to the new owner. So closing can happen at any time of the day on closing day. So keep that in mind before scheduling the moving trucks or the movers. There are a lot of pieces to manage in the real estate transaction. For those that we have the pleasure of representing, we manage the process and make sure that you meet all of your timelines so your earnest money is never at risk and you never lose the opportunity to negotiate. For those that are ready to embark on this journey unrepresented, remember this is a legal agreement between buyer and seller to transfer the ownership of the property. The details of the transaction must be clear and in writing, especially when including contingencies. Protect yourself, your earnest money, and your future investment. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to comment below or reach out.